my daughter, when she was 5, I asked her, what did she want to learn when she went to school? And she said, I want to learn about blood.
Kia ora, I'm Davina Zimmer, and today on The Detail, no, not blood.
The thing about schools, because it's standardised curriculum, you don't get to learn about blood until you're 13.
Is our education system giving our tamariki the best start in life?
We have this idea where we privilege thinking over feeling. We privilege thinking over sensing. And yet I would argue that to be a fully human person, to be the best of who you are, it's a balance of your head and your heart and your body.
Peter O'Connor is a professor in education at the University of Auckland. His work focuses on using art to bring joy back to kids who've been through natural disasters. Next month, he'll be giving a public lecture as part of the university's Raising the Bar event. His topic, Are Our Schools Killing Children's Imagination?
Well, the first thing to say, I guess, is that when children arrive at 5, their lives are completely dominated by the imagination. It's the way in which they learned about the world when they were very little. When they wanted to discover things, they don't Google, they don't look it up in a book. They imagine. They pretend that there's someone other than themselves. So when they come to school, they're completely full of an imaginary world, and that slowly but surely shrinks. And one of the reasons why it shrinks is because of the nature of what happens in schools. And the argument that I'm really wanting to make in Raising the Bar is that that's a really dangerous thing to do to young people, is to strip them of their imagination. And particular kinds of schooling can do that and do it really quickly.
You said particular kinds of schooling. So are there some formats that do it quicker?
Yes, and the kinds of changes that this government are planning will kill it really quickly.
Since coming into office at the end of last year, the new coalition government has made a raft of changes to the education sector.
I am alarmed and really concerned about the state of education in New Zealand.
What we need to do is have a yearly curriculum that lays out the non-negotiable knowledge that has to be taught each year.
We're going to require all primary and intermediate schools to provide at least an hour of reading, an hour of writing and an hour of maths on average every day.
Importantly, we are now working at pace to ensure our literacy and numeracy curricula is knowledge-rich, internationally comparable and structured, so that we have consistency across New Zealand on what is being taught.
They will also ramp up the frequency with which schools test students.
Primary school children will soon face standardised testing as part of the government's mission to improve education achievement. From next year, all Year 1 students will do a phonics check after 20 weeks at school and then again after 40 weeks to help teachers understand how well a child can read words by sounding out letters.
Education Minister Erica Stanford says it will help identify which children are falling behind and keep parents informed about their progress.
We know from international evidence that regimes of constant testing not only doesn't lift achievement, there's so much evidence about that.
For example, researchers at Auckland University of Technology found that over-testing creates anxiety and affects a child's mental well-being, and that using testing as a measure of a student's performance also encourages teachers to teach to the test. And Peter says, by design, it stamps out imagination.
But it also damages the way in which children think about being playful with learning. We know that it limits the ways in which children take risks with their learning. To be imaginative, to be creative, is to take risks. When you're constantly being tested, what you're replacing that curiosity with is a desire for children to find the singular right answer. And that traps the imagination, that kills the imagination really quickly. And what we've got with the proposed changes from this government is children are going to be tested and tested and tested and tested. And it's not really to improve learning, it's to produce the KPIs for the minister so that she can say to the Prime Minister, look, we've come in and look, we've lifted all this achievement, and it's really a nonsense. But it's a damaging and dangerous nonsense Because when you kill the spark of creativity, when you kill the spark of the imagination, it's really difficult to capture it back. They have this thing called direct instruction, which is the big buzzword now from this government. But basically it means a teacher standing at the front of a classroom and yammering away at kids, sticking as many facts as they possibly can, as much knowledge as they can into kids' heads so that you can test them about how much they've retained. It's as boring as it sounds as a way to be for hours when you're a child sitting listening to direct instruction. And what we know is that children learn through experience. Yes, of course it's important for teachers to grab the moment and to teach and to pass on knowledge. It's part of what we do as teachers. But children come to school learning through experience. And if we take that away and what we do instead is just place children in straight rows, fronting up and listening to the teacher, giving direct instruction and then teaching and then testing it, well, it'd be enough to put me to sleep, and I would imagine it will do that to many, many children in this country over the coming years. It's a disaster.
But children do need to leave school with a certain level of knowledge to thrive in society. Peter says creating a classroom that nurtures imaginations doesn't necessarily mean throwing out all the 1B5s and Atticuses. Academic knowledge and imagination can coexist.
A lot of the rhetoric that comes from government is around, that we no longer have a knowledge-rich curriculum. It's a nonsense. Kids go to school and are learning all day. And they're not just learning at school, they're learning all the time. The latest PISA results on creativity contest that binary. You can and could and should have both. Children learn through rich play and experience. There's nothing more academic than the arts, I would suggest to you. If you play a musical instrument, it's highly disciplined, it's highly academic. There's a lot of knowledge in that. But there's a freedom and a creativity. It's not an either or. Education systems which have and, that's where you get the real results. And, we don't have to look too far to find education systems that do that. You just have to look a little back in time.
In the year 2000, the OECD began monitoring education systems, and New Zealand was one of the top performers. Peter credits our performance with the fact that our wide curriculum balanced rich academic knowledge with arts and other creative subjects. But our system began narrowing in 2008.
The key government came in and we had national standards. We had a grinding focus on literacy and numeracy. Let's test to make sure we have the standard child. And one of the things that we've seen is a drop-off internationally since those failed policies of the early 2000s. We've dropped in those rankings as a result of the kind of push which has now been accelerated.
Is it just an issue with the schooling system, or is it a wider social issue of the way that we view intelligence and what it means to be successful?
Well, there's two parts of that. What do we think makes a successful person? We've bought into an idea of a successful person who achieves success by the amount of money they make, the status that they have. It's about what they get rather than what they give. Success for me has never been about that. But what we've done in education is to narrow that even further. So they don't even talk about success at school. They talk about achievement, and achievement is measured by how well you can read and how well you can write. One of the things that we know is how successful you are at school or how well you achieve at school has very little bearing on how successful you are as a human being.
So are there some existing models that we can look to for examples of how schooling can nurture children's imagination while teaching them what they need to know?
There's a narrative that schools are failing, and I don't want to buy into that. I actually think schools and teachers do a pretty good job. There's extraordinary work happening in so many schools. And I think one of the tragedies of the debate around education in this country is that it's all around bashing teachers and schools over the head and saying they're doing a really bad job. Many schools and many teachers are creating spaces where children feel loved, safe, warm, protected. They can take risks with their learning. They're cared for. We see that in so many different ways. And there's a narrative which has been created, which is we've got it really wrong. We need to go to more testing, direct instructions, control what teachers are doing, slam down over the top, unless, of course, you're a charter school and you can do whatever the hell you like. So, there's that strange dichotomy in this government anyway around education.
I'd like to go a little bit more into that, actually. You've opened up a little can of worms that I'd like to dig into. Are charter schools kind of a model of what the ideal schooling system would look like?
Yes and no. I believe we should trust teachers and the professionals to get on with the job. And if that was available to all schools. But actually what you've got with charter schools is, and the real danger now, I think, is, they're going to be sold off for profit, And so once you start selling off core functions of government for people to make money on them, prisons, schooling, all those things, they all end in disasters. Look at what charter schools have done in the UK, free schools academies. It's been an absolute disaster. So no, charter schools doesn't do that. But the idea that communities and schools really know, I think there's a strange split in this government and its approach, which is a real nanny state approach to, we're going to have teachers doing this, we're going to have cursive writing, we're going to have Shakespeare. Here's a long list of all the things that kids need to know. But charter schools, well, you can have a cell phone, I think, by the sound of it, in a charter school.
Well, I guess education, for a long time, it's had this hierarchy of subjects, at the very top, and this is globally as well. You've got your maths and you've got your languages, and then you go all the way down and eventually you get to the arts. And that hierarchy is apparent all through, primary school, high school, university. Even if you graduate university with an arts degree, it's not seen as valuable as if you graduate with a law degree. That sounds also like a societal issue.
It is. Look, you can go back to Cartesian duality, if you like. You can go all the way to Descartes coming out of his oven and saying, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. He didn't come out and say, I feel, therefore I am, or I sense the world. Might have changed everything, but there is a privileging of, and it's male, and it's particular ways of being in the world are privileged over others. And I don't think it's done us much good. And yet, there's something that we understand about the arts, that when the world's in a mess, for example, and it's pretty much in a mess at the moment, the place we go to for solace, the place we go to make real meaning and sense of the world isn't the sciences, it's the arts. They are the cornerstone of what makes us fully human. And when we take them from our schools, when we drop them into the trivial, into the peripheral, we deny the fullness of ourselves.
In an ideal world, what would the schooling system look like for you?
In an ideal world, the arts would be at the centre. The basics for me are really simple. In the kind of world that we live in, empathy is a basic. And that's why the imagination is so important. To be able to imagine someone other than yourself and what their life is so vitally important in our times now. That's a basic that I would make sure that we had central. We know that the creative process can be taught, it can be measured. It's not a binary, it's not an either or. Kids need skills and they need knowledge and they need to be inspired. Schools should be places where kids want to go to. There's nothing more exciting for a 5-year-old than their first day of school. I don't know if you remember it. It's like, oh, I can't wait. And then there's this kind of awful thing that happens to so many of them. It's like, oh my God, how much longer do I have to do here? Schools should be places, and they are for many, where you feel safe, you feel loved, you feel cared for. There's an opportunity for you to discover the things that you want to discover. You know, my daughter, when she was 5, I asked her, what did she want to learn when she went to school? And she said, I want to learn about blood. And for me, you know, the thing about schools, because it's standardised curriculum, and you don't get to learn about blood until you're 13. But she should be able to go to a school where her curiosity can be met. She should be able to go to school where she feels that when a teacher asks her a question, she can be playful with the answer. She can get it wrong. She can do all those kinds of things. So that's what I would imagine.
There would be critics out there that say, well, that just sounds bonkers and crazy and you're letting kids basically run wild. How would you justify it to someone that as a valid curriculum?
Well, I would go back to the idea that the arts are highly disciplined ways of thinking. They're not just ways of expressing what we think, but they're highly disciplined ways of thinking about the world and making sense of the world. So it's not about kids running wildly. The one person who's paid to be in a classroom, who has ultimate responsibility for the quality of the learning, is the teacher. And what we know is that having teachers who excite and inspire children with learning is probably the most important thing you can have in a classroom. Many of us only ever had 1 or 2 of those. And we loved them and cherished them because they believed in us, they trusted us, they gave us space, they taught us. They weren't our friends, you know, and you know, they were adults who we looked up to, who led us, who helped shape our understandings of the world. That they weren't just preparing us for the future, but they were helping us make sense of the now. And I don't think that's a recipe for chaos. It's a recipe for messy learning. Learning's messy. It's not some straight linear thing that happens. You know, there's a great Peanuts cartoon where I think Charlie says, I've taught Snoopy how to whistle. And someone says, oh, can he whistle? And he said, no, I only taught him. He didn't learn. And I think there's this other kind of thing that we think if we have teachers standing and kids are sitting in rows all facing the front, that somehow they're going to learn more because it's neat and tidy. But it's just neat and tidy. And learning's not neat and tidy.
Teachers listening to this may be thinking, controlling 20-odd 6-year-olds is already incredibly crazy or messy, as you put it earlier, with the curriculum that we have right now. How can we allow for teachers to still have some kind of control over the classroom without holding children's imagination back and forcing them into these little boxes?
Well, I think there's a lot of stuff in the curriculum you don't need to teach. You know, people tell me all the time it's crowded, but it's crowded with stuff that's not really important. I had a mentor of mine, a great drama teacher, Dorothy Heathcote, asked me once, so do children in New Zealand schools learn things that matter? So if you ask yourself that as a teacher, does it really matter that they know this? That would strip a lot of stuff. But it was a follow-up question. And in learning that, do children learn that they matter? So if you had those 2 questions in your head as a teacher, is this stuff that matters? And am I making sure that children know they matter? I think that would be the 2 great guiding questions that in fact, you know, I teach up at the University of Auckland. I teach teachers how to teach. And I think about that when I walk in and I'm training them. Does it matter that they know that? Yes, it does. I'll teach that. But is it built inside a container where they know that they matter, that I care about them, deeply care about them? If I've got those 2 things right, I think just about everything else works in a classroom.
Do you think that in that sense we perhaps need to change the way that teachers are taught how to teach, going right back to how they get their degrees?
Yes, I do. But it also goes back to who are we attracting into teaching? If we're going to do what we're doing all the time, which is to bash teachers, if we pay them badly, if the working conditions aren't great, and if we give them a deadly dull curriculum to teach and constrain their pedagogy, the way in which they teach it, that's where we start to really run into problems.
Obviously, children are at school for only a portion of the day.
Thank God.
And they spend a lot of their time, at home with their parents.
Yeah.
So what can parents do to nurture that imagination?
Play alongside, play with, value their imagination. Don't judge it. There's nothing worse when you're a kid and you draw something and what is it? It doesn't take much, does it, for you to feel once you're judged, oh, I can't sing, I can't paint, I can't draw, I can't act, I can't be creative. The number of people I meet who say, oh, I'm not creative like you, Peter, and I go, of course you are. We're born creative. We imagine each day. We improvise our lives. Life is a jazz session. It's just that possibility. So parents need to do that, and parents do. They understand it. They get it. There's lots of evidence to suggest that if you really want your kids to be successful at school, it's about how much you read to them, how many books you have in your house, and how many cultural activities they engage in beyond and with their family. Simple, really. If we can't imagine ourselves differently, if we can't imagine the world differently, this is as good as the world gets. So when we say we kill the imagination, we kill hope. And when we kill children's hope, that is a tragedy beyond compare, really. When you strip that sense that I can be bigger and better than myself, and that the world can be better than it is, we're just left in the dark. And children deserve an education system. They deserve a world where they can continue to imagine bigger, better, brighter, more wonderful. We're not playing with something inconsequential. The most sacred thing you can do as a teacher is to keep children's imagination alive.
That's all for today. If you do want to hear more from Peter O'Connor, he will be speaking at the Raising the Bar event on the 27th of August. This episode of The Detail was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by Alex Harmer. Thank you to Peter O'Connor for joining me. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and NZ On Air. I'm Davina Zimmer, ka kite anō.